sure you'll pay the price, but then now you'll be here alone and blue, 'cause someone took my place with you. Someone left me here to cry, and with each day that passes by, I'm found here alone and blue, 'cause someone took my place with you.
From Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, for the last generation,
I'm
you have a choice.
the Republican candidate for governor.
I did not have sexual relations with
I
that
realize that this is something he is
We're not going to be able to solve our problems if we get distracted by sideshows and carnival barkers.
One Republican, one Democrat, and you discuss the issues that matter in today's local, state, national, and global politics. Hosted by Steve Hickson with co-hosts John Stanberry and Franklin Chansey. This is Backfire.
Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome back to Backfire this morning with John Stanberry and Franklin Chansey. He's our co-host here in the studio. Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
Hey, Steve.
Happy New Year to you.
Same to you.
Oh, boy, I tell you what, we got a lot to talk about, I'm sure. Of course, I've been watching ball games. I haven't been watching any news. I just can't bring it myself to turn on the news anymore, it seems like.
I hadn't watched the news since the election.
I've been watching a lot of ball games here lately. Anyway, there's a lot of things we can start with, but we might as well start with this physical cliff thing that's going on everywhere. What's your opinion? What's happened so far?
Well, I think you saw from my side everything that's wrong in Washington in the last 24 hours. The leadership of the House Republican Party has just been totally inept. They could have gotten a much bigger deal 2 years ago. Could have got a much bigger deal 30 days ago. Could have got a better deal a week ago. But instead they kept walking away from everything that was offered. And so you ended up with this deal last night that just dealt with the revenue side but didn't deal with the spending issues. Mm-hmm. It's just punted it off for a couple of months down the road, which we're going to have to deal with it again. I was pleased to see that the Republicans in the Senate showed a little bit of leadership, a little bit of bipartisanship, especially our senators in Tennessee, who I think were adults in the process, which is what we needed. And now we'll see how they respond. But I think that it was not a very pretty experience, that's for sure.
Well, John, let's have your opinion.
Well, I mean, that's assuming that you accept this idea that what the Democrats have proposed is a balanced approach. The president keeps saying balanced approach. Well, the Senate deal that Franklin's so proud of offered $1 in spending cuts for every $41 in tax increases. If that's your idea of a balanced approach, then you and I have a very different opinion of what balanced means. On top of that, when you talk about the children in the room, the vice president was in intense negotiations with Mitch McConnell in the Senate. And what does the president decide to do? He decides to go out and hold a pep rally. He holds a press conference where I guess he thinks he's still campaigning. He puts, I think one columnist described it as a rainbow of color behind him, supposedly middle-class mothers and families behind him, where he proceeds to basically chastise and accuse the Republicans of not wanting to support the country. He also makes sure he reminds them, by the way, folks, I won. And you had senators like Bob Corker, that Franklin is complimenting, walk straight back onto the Senate floor and say, I cannot believe that this president is doing this in the middle of this negotiations, and said most likely he lost votes today when he did that. So you want to talk about childish? Ask your president to accept himself that he won and start leading and quit campaigning.
Let me give you a couple of examples of what I'm talking about here. First of all, why did this vote happen like it did last night? Well, it happened because of the most amazingly juvenile thing I've ever seen. Last night, they let the Bush tax cuts expire before they voted on purpose. Why? So Grover Norquist could go on TV last night and say, these Republicans didn't really violate their pledge not to raise taxes because they went up automatically at midnight. So this was really a vote by them to cut taxes. That's what he did last night. It was ridiculous. It was people who didn't want to make a hard decision and couldn't bring themselves to do it. Why was Vice President Biden in these negotiations with Senator McConnell? Because there was no way in heck the Republican Party was going to work out anything directly with Barack Obama. It was that juvenile.
Franklin,
you know what?
Exactly
Franklin, I'd be the same way if I was there.
Answer me a question, Franklin.
I couldn't deal with the smart.
What was the
like
point in Barack Obama having that pep rally that he had on the news?
Keeping public pressure on these people to get off their rear ends and do something.
Not leading, but campaigning. Yeah. That's all he knows how to do is campaign.
We had this bill passes with 89-7 in the Senate, obviously bipartisan, and we spent all day yesterday with them trying to dig up enough Republican votes to pass the bill.
Do you think $1 in spending cuts for $41 in tax increases is going to help us get out of our spending problem?
Oh, no, John, I don't think that at all. What I do think is that when your party was offered a $4 trillion deficit reduction package that had half spending cuts and half tax increases,
Franklin,
you turned it down.
That's not true.
And then
Franklin,
last month, when you were offered a $2.2 trillion deal,
None of
they
that
walked
was true.
away from that.
None of that was true, Franklin. The $4 trillion was because the president assumed that sequestration would kick in, something that he knew would never happen. This man manipulates and bends. You tell me this, Franklin. His first offer several months ago had an actual $50 billion increase in spending. How is that balanced? How is that going to
negotiate,
Franklin,
John?
4 years ago, we had almost $1 trillion increase in our budget based on the stimulus. If you look up the word stimulus, it's supposed to be an extraordinary push for something. What it's become, and it's exactly what Republicans said Obama would do, the $1 trillion increase in spending has become the baseline that we now negotiate from.
So tell me, John, why it is that we went through all this 2 years. All this has been a massive gamble by the Republican Party that Barack Obama wouldn't get elected.
Let me correct one thing, Franklin. All of this has been a massive gamble by the White House that created the entire fiscal cliff in itself, which he then lied about during the campaign. This was a White House idea. It was proposed by them. It actually had to be kind of forced on the Republicans originally.
Because
so don't turn around. No. Don't turn around and say that we're responsible for the fiscal cliff. He created it.
No, you're not responsible for the mechanism. You're responsible for the approach to it.
Well, I'm glad you said that because the president disavowed any connection to it at all.
Let's go a little bit further with this. The wool was pulled back yesterday over what's been really going on in the House of Representatives. They actually had a policy for the last 2 years, an actual policy that they would bring nothing up for a vote unless they had the votes just on the Republican side to pass it. No bipartisanship at all.
Do you think that may have came since there hadn't been a budget in 3 years?
In the Senate, in the Democrat Senate?
The House had passed a budget.
Let me ask you a question.
We're talking about the House.
Well, tell me what's reasonable about this. The House and the Senate are two different bodies. So the House says, hey, we'd like some spending cuts in this bill, so we'd like to propose some amendments. The Senate Democrat leadership sends a message back, we will accept no amendments whatsoever. Now, tell me how that's cooperative.
Well, here's the problem with it, John. Your speaker a week ago said, I'm done, when he tried to get his own bill through his own House and couldn't get his own Republican Party to vote for it. He said, I'm done. It's up to the Senate to pass something. And if the Senate passes something, we'll take it up here.
And then you compromise.
Then as soon as he got there, he decided, nope, we're not going to do that. We're not going to have a vote And the reason is because he knew it would pass. And he knew that some members of his party would vote for it, which is what happened if they ever get a chance to. They've actually created a system where only if the Republican Party can pass the bill will they allow it to even come up for a vote.
Franklin, explain how you balance that with a Democratic Senate that hasn't passed a budget in 3 years, had a majority, could pass anything they wanted to pass, couldn't pass a budget for three solid years.
I agree with you. But the Senate did step up and do something on a bipartisan basis.
Do you really think that?
89-7.
Do you think that a 41-1 is a balanced approach? $41 in tax
because
increases
all they
for
did,
$1
all they
spending
did
cuts?
was postpone for 2 months, having to deal with the spending issues.
Well,
That's
let me
all
ask
that
you a
happened.
question, Franklin.
But I
Do
will
you-
say this: the results today would have been catastrophic if they hadn't. And I'm pleased to see a moment ago that the markets have responded very positively. They're up dramatically already this morning.
Franklin, do you think that the original almost $1 trillion in stimulus spending, was that an increase in the baseline, or should that have been considered a one-time stimulus spending? Because it's become the baseline, and that's really why we're in a $1 trillion a year deficit problem. And if you
That's not accurate, John.
Franklin, it's
We
become
had
the
$1
baseline.
trillion deficit.
He's increased
We
the
had a $1
spending.
trillion deficit.
We had an
The day that George Bush left office.
We had an $880 billion stimulus package, Franklin. That's become the baseline.
John, we had a $1 trillion deficit the day George Bush left office.
And now we have
Now, I'm not
$1.5
saying-
trillion every year.
But that wasn't stimulus spending. It was already there. It was
$800 billion
two
of
wars
it.
that we weren't paying for.
And we're not doing that anymore. So why aren't we seeing the
No,
savings?
we still are doing it.
Franklin, we had $800 billion in stimulus spending.
Mm-hmm.
Why, since the stimulus is over, have we not seen an $800 billion reduction in the budget? We haven't. His budget has gone up every year he's been in office.
I'm sorry. Do you agree that we're spending too much, Franklin? Do you agree to that?
I think there are areas that we're spending too much, yes.
Overall, are we spending more than we should be?
Well, the answer to that's obvious. It's because we're spending more than we're taking in. That's common sense.
Well, then
I agree.
That's
Now, wait a
common
minute. Now
sense.
we're talking.
Okay, that's
You're
common
right
sense,
about that.
But here's the problem, okay? And this is what I've been preaching in here for a year or more.
Mm-hmm.
This discussion is completely backwards. We ought to be looking at what we're spending money on and deciding if we want it or not. And if we do, we should say, here's what the tax has to be to pay for it. Do you want to do it still? That's the way it should go. Instead, all we do is we have this ludicrous discussion about, oh, spending's too high and taxes are too high.
Do you think you can
Franklin,
walk through the front door of any government office and not be able to lay off at least 25% of the employees there?
Oh, I don't know the answer to that.
Franklin,
But I do know what the effect on the economy would be.
Let me
if
ask
did
you a
that. It'd be
question,
pretty
Franklin. Did
significant.
Paul Ryan propose spending cuts?
When?
Last year, did Paul Ryan put forward a budget full of spending cuts?
No, he put forward a proposal that said it had spending cuts in it and refused to tell us
That's
what
not
they were.
true, Franklin.
It is true.
No, you're talking about the campaign. Before he was vice president, did he put forth a budget with spending cuts?
That was 2 years ago.
What did the Democrats and Barack Obama do to him when he did that? What ad did they run? They ran an ad of a man who looked almost exactly like him pushing a little old lady in a wheelchair over a cliff. So that was your party's response to a Republican who did say, okay, let's start the conversation. Here's some things I think ought to be cut. This president hasn't reduced his budget in 4 years. Every budget has been higher than the year before, every time.
And that's because every economist worth his salt has said you don't reduce budgets
And how's it
in the
worked
middle
so
of a
far?
recession.
How's it worked so
Well,
far, Franklin?
it turned it around. That's how it did
It
it.
hadn't turned anything around.
Apparently not in your industry, John. A lot of other people's. It
Well, I guess Mr. Obama can go back to playing golf now. What do you think? Now, wait a minute. We've got the money's cut off in 2 months, right?
Right.
They've got 2 months to do something, so then they've got to start looking for some more money.
Well, Franklin, answer me this. Why would the president put forward an executive order increasing the pay of all government employees, including the Congress?
That was taken out of the bill last night, by the way.
Well, but
No,
wait a
no,
minute.
he-
That's
wait a
your
minute, he did it.
president who supposedly.
That was taken out of the
I
bill last
understand it was taken out. But let me ask, it's an executive order by his White House. It wasn't even a congressional action. The president, through executive order, gave a pay raise to all federal employees, including himself.
That was taken
Why
out
would he
also.
do that? If he truly believes that we're spending too much and he wants to cut spending, why would he give himself a pay raise?
Well, the only way you can actually do that by executive order, John, is by redirecting other funds. You can't increase the budget that way.
But Franklin, it sure tells you that he wants some more money, doesn't it? Do you find that to be a good faith effort for the people of America? Let's say you're right and we're slowly crawling our way out of this recession. Do you think we think Joe Biden needs a $6,000 a year raise to his salary?
Get one.
The president gave it to him. Congress
No,
took it away. I swear, Franklin, can you not at least look at that and say the president did it and he shouldn't have?
What you can't do is selectively give federal employees a raise.
No, so he gave
What you
all
can't-
of them a raise.
Yes, and then you can take it away from certain.
He
ones.
didn't take it away.
He signed an executive order on Thursday.
This past Thursday,
that's
in the
right.
middle of this negotiation.
Right. That increases take effect in late March. The pay raise will generally be about 0.5%. It's amazing. It talks about some of the Biden's salary is going to jump from $225,521 to $231,900.
Well, Representative Michelle Bachmann, that your party loved to make fun of, issued a statement and was going to introduce legislation saying this executive order was not requested by Congress and we should reject it. We have a spending problem in our country and we should be looking for areas to cut spending. At a time when families across the country are cutting back, we should not increase government spending and add to the debt burden by giving members of Congress a pay raise. We need to begin with ourselves, and I urge my colleagues to join me in this effort.
And that's what happened.
Now, John,
But
John,
the point is the president, Franklin.
John.
Why did he do it?
John, let me try to explain this. Obama's from Chicago, right? Mm-hmm. In Chicago, I think they believe in buying votes. So maybe that's why it happened. Who knows?
I mean, that shows you where his heart's at. Give me a pay raise.
Yeah. I really starting to dislike this man. No.
You loved him so much last year.
No. Let me tell you something. Most of the time, I can learn to live with the politicians. You know, if he's there, he's president, he was elected, I can try to comprehend and just try to move along with it. I can't do that with this guy. This guy's a complete smartass. He is he's a dictator. I really do think that our country's got a problem with him trying to lead us, or so-called being our leader now.
What you'll see in this circumstance that you
And he's a
wouldn't
liar.
see
I
on
forgot to
the
say
other
that. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
What you won't see on the other side is that he's been catching all kinds of heck for the last month from his left about giving away too much in these deals.
Well, the left's driving us
Hold
into the
on, let me
ground.
finish. He's been getting pilloried. He's been doing it this morning. I saw all kinds of people on the news this morning doing it because they thought he gave away too much. The difference is he's obviously not terrified by that, and he's been willing to sit down and offer these different things to try and reach a resolution. I'm sorry that they keep walking away from it, but that's how it is.
Well, Franklin, let me ask you a question about the American public and how they respond to a president. He goes on NBC's Meet the Press this past Sunday, and this is a direct quote from him. He said, "If you look at my track record over the last 2 years, I cut spending by over $1 trillion in 2011. Now, Franklin, here's a report from the White House's Office of Managing Budget. Federal spending was not cut by $1 trillion in 2011. In fact, in fiscal 2010, federal spending was $3,456 billion. In fiscal 2011, federal spending was $3,600 billion. That was an increase of $147 billion. Now, that's his own White House budget office saying that increases in spending went up in 2011. But this president has the gall to sit on a national talk show on Sunday and say, I cut spending by over $1 trillion in 2011. You tell me how I'm supposed to respect a man that'll out and out lie like that to the public.
Because having been up there, John, what the Washington smoke and mirror game is, and it's nothing that's limited to the president. What they call reductions in some cases is forestalling.
He didn't say
increases.
reduction. He said I cut
understand
spending.
what you're
He
saying,
said I
John.
cut spending.
And in a perfect world, I'd agree with you completely.
That he
about
lied?
That theory.
That he lied.
That every politician I see when he gets on television shades the truth.
Well,
yes,
you know what,
every
Franklin?
time.
We've had local politicians that shaded the truth, and I opposed them, and they were Republicans. So I'm not going to buy into this. They all lie, so we should just accept
I'm not saying we should accept it. I'm just saying let's call it what it is.
It's a lie, and he's a liar.
What I know, 56% of Americans now have a favorable impression of the president
Because he's a
because of the way he's handled this
because of the way he's
circumstance.
campaigned, because of press conferences like he had
9%
Monday.
have a positive impression of the Republican leadership
He's done
because of the way
Franklin,
they've handled
I
this
will
matter.
give you it. He is an excellent campaigner. He is a horrible leader.
Amen. What? How much time do we have? 8 minutes. All right, let's get into this. What are we going to do about the guns situation? We've had the mass killing in the school and so forth, and school started back today, I think, there for those kids.
Thursday, actually.
Is that Thursday?
Yeah. I did see that they're moving those kids to a different elementary school. I'm
Morning,
pleased to see.
Matador. Matador's out about moving around this morning. You want to talk some politics with us, Matador? We're talking about your brother of another mother here, Mr. Obama. Anyway, the gun control. There's going to be a big push right now, I think, to start trying to do gun control. They keep pushing this.
I think the impetus is going to be on trying to reinstitute things that were in effect 20 years ago.
I thought you were going to say ineffective because they were.
Well, there's a real debate about that point.
Actually, there's no debate, Franklin. They
there's
were
a
ineffective.
big debate, John.
Well, Columbine happened in the middle of the assault weapons ban. How did it work?
And what were all the guns they were using in Columbine?
They were assault weapons, and as a matter of fact, they also used propane tanks.
And the answer to that question, John, is because everybody understands that we are in a wash in those significant types of guns, and it's true that you can't deal with them in a year. You can't deal with them in 18 months. It just won't work. But in the long run, that is something that's worth looking at. Nobody thinks that people shouldn't be able to defend themselves in their homes, or nobody thinks that you shouldn't be able to go hunting and that you shouldn't be able to have firearms.
Actually,
to do
the
that.
sponsor in the Senate, Dianne Feinstein, admitted in a press conference the other day that she would like to ban the private ownership of all guns.
Well, whether she would like to do that or not, there's
Well,
no
she's the
impetus-
leader of the charge.
There's no impetus in the United States.
So in other words,
of
because
America
that's
for
what
that.
she wants to do, but you're saying she couldn't cram it through right away, we shouldn't worry about what she ultimately is trying to
No,
do.
what I think is that there's an overwhelming consensus in America that supports gun ownership. Any other suggestion is just ludicrous. There's no reason to even fight that battle.
I'm not suggesting that. I'm saying
What
that the
there is-
political
what there
class
is
in the
not-
Democrat Party hates guns
What there
in
is
private
not
hands.
is an overwhelming consensus about assault weapons, about expanded magazines. Those are things that we ought to reasonably be able to talk about. As I was mentioning last time, we have limitations on all of our other constitutional rights. You can't say anything you want. I can't go out and tell vicious lies about you without subjecting myself to penalties. I can't, there are limitations on when the government can come into your house and seize things, but they can still do it sometimes. There's all sorts of rights that we have that have some reasonable limitations because we live in a complicated society. I don't know why the Second Amendment is supposed to be given special treatment above other constitutional
How is it
rights.
special treatment? You're saying that we
Well,
should regulate
here's
these guns
what I-
because they're
here's what-
too capable? Is that it?
Well, let me. I've seen what the manufacturer of those Bushmaster assault rifles has on its website.
Mm-hmm.
It says it's good enough for a professional. It's good enough for you.
Franklin, why is it not a legal hunting rifle in a lot of states? It wasn't in Tennessee until a few years ago for varmints and all. So why is it not legal to kill a deer with a .223?
I don't know the answer to that.
Because it's not deadly enough. Now, when you outlaw that .223, my .308 Winchester deer rifle is much deadlier than a .223.
But you'd be hard pressed to.
No, I wouldn't.
You'd
It's
be
a
hard
semi-automatic.
You'd be
No.
hard pressed to.
No, I wouldn't at all.
Well,
It won't make any difference at all. Let me ask you a question, Franklin. These are too modern and they're too effective. Is that correct?
what I think, John, is that they have a capability which allows them to be very efficient killing machines in mass scope.
Do you believe in the First Amendment?
Sure I do.
Should it be regulated to a hand printing press, manually set, like it was when they wrote the Constitution?
No, John.
Why
but
not?
I don't
Now, wait a
believe-
minute. The founders couldn't have envisioned the internet. They couldn't have envisioned television. They couldn't have envisioned computer printers. So maybe we should restrict the First Amendment to a manually operated hand printing press.
Well, I'm glad you're agreeing that there could be some regulation.
I'm just asking for equal treatment.
Let me give you the example, John. The ACLU takes your position about the First Amendment, and I've heard you.
But they take your position on gun control.
No, hold on a minute. About 100 times I've heard you make snide, disparaging comments about the ACLU because they take an extremist view of the First Amendment, that there should be no limitations on it. You think that's crazy. Well, that's how we feel about the Second Amendment.
Not really, Franklin. There's all kinds of... As a matter of fact, guns are probably the most regulated thing in our country, and yet people still get them to kill people. The boys in Columbine broke 23 different gun control laws. Do you think a 24th would have made a difference?
Are you going to make it more difficult?
Well, let me give you, for example, a Glock pistol, Franklin. There was a 12-year-old girl home alone last week. Now, of course, these kind of stories never get covered by the media because they don't like guns. And so anytime there's a gun used in a horrific crime, it's all over the news. Anytime a gun is used to stop a crime, it gets no coverage at all. But you've got a 12-year-old girl at home alone. This guy comes to the door, and the mother, in retrospect, thinks that he had been watching the house. And he starts knocking on the door. Well, she won't open the door. Doesn't even indicate that she's in the house. Goes, calls her mother. Her mother tells her to lock herself in the closet of the bathroom, and before she does, to get the Glock 40, which is one of the guns that have been used in these mass shootings, and to call 911. So she does. She calls 911. The man breaks in the house. He's in the house for over 6 minutes before he tries the door to the closet that she's locked inside. Now, the police have not responded yet, and that's not a knock on the police at all. But it takes a while for them to get there. She shoots the guy through the door. He ends up in the hospital, is arrested. He's a child molester. Now, that Glock 40, that weapon of mass destruction in the hands of a 12-year-old saved her life, probably saved her from a horrific sexual assault. That's the problem. The media doesn't give the public any balance to any of this. Guns are used over 2.5 million times a year to stop crimes. They've actually stopped multiple. Did you know that the day before this horrific shooting in Massachusetts, there was a shooting in a mall? And there were actually two different ones. There was one in a movie theater, and an off-duty policewoman shot the guy before he could kill anybody. In the second incident, a bystander with a concealed carry permit, after the man had killed 2 people and was moving out into the main mall to shoot more people, confronted him. The guy, when confronted, stopped, shot himself. So there's 2 people dead that might have been 20 people dead had an armed citizen not intervened with one of the very guns that you're talking about. So if you want balance, make sure we get balance in the discussion.
Someone sent me an email the other day. It had all these establishments that had guns allowed signs on the front door.
Well, tell me why if guns are the problem, why has there never been a mass shooting at a gun range? Gun ranges have unbelievable amounts of firepower. All the people have all these high-powered semi-automatic rifles. Why has there never been a mass shooting at a gun range?
They know they'll get shot by somebody else, I guess.
Well, I rather doubt that the assailant in the Sandy Hook case was concerned about whether he was going to get shot or not.
He may not have been
I don't
concerned,
think
but
that
when
was
he
an
was
issue.
shot, he wouldn't shoot anyone else.
He'd be dead.
The principal was shot trying to stop him from coming into the building. What if she had had a gun? and she had shot him as he came
What
in
if
the
she
building.
didn't want to have a gun?
Then she does.
Does that mean that she's not qualified to be principal
Frankly,
anymore?
we didn't
Is that
see.
what you were gonna
That's
say?
what you're doing.
No,
You
I'm
turn
saying-
the conversation.
I'm not.
I ask you a question. What if she had a gun? I'm not saying we
Well,
force
she
her to
might
have a
have
gun.
stopped it.
Maybe
Who
one of
knows?
the other teachers would want to have a gun. Nearly all of the the legislation that's been proposed, Eric Watson has proposed one on the state level, that teachers at their own request be allowed to have a gun and be required, if they're going to do that, to have crisis training, to have hostage negotiation training. So when all the left says, oh, people aren't trained, fine, we'll give them the training.
Let's take a break. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Backfire with Steve Hickson. We'll be right back after this.
WOOP, LP, Cleveland, Tennessee.
WOOP FM is a nonprofit community radio station that is made possible